this point, and hopefully people will continue to join us as we go along. We have a good lineup with a couple of speakers here, and I suppose to start off, just to give you a brief introduction. So we are the Africa Climate Action Partnership, who have been working for the last 10, 11 years as part of the Global Climate Action Partnership to support countries and the region in building strong low emissions development pathways. We work across different work streams. We work in the field of energy access, as well as in the AfCAP sector, primarily in the livestock sector that we are focusing on right now, as well as other areas related, other related areas within the AfCAP sector. A lot of the work that we do is in close collaboration with valued partners and institutions. And of course, with this particular meeting, we are privileged to work very closely with the Eastern and Southern Africa Regional Collaboration Centre for the UNFCCC. I see my colleague Lawrence is here, and I will be handing over to him in just a little bit to give us a little bit of an overview of some opening remarks from the perspective of the UNFCCC RCC for Eastern and Southern Africa. We are particularly privileged to be talking about the experiences that countries have gone through in terms of strengthening the GHG agricultural greenhouse gas inventories, and how this can support the important work of strengthening, of revising the NDCs. We know that this year and next year are key years in terms of updating NDCs, and for us it is important to provide as much support to countries in revising these NDCs and making sure that the AfCAP sector, the livestock targets, accurately reflected in the revised NDCs in a way that can be implemented over the next few years. A lot of the work, as a last comment, that we have been doing together with the UNFCCC RCC is around strengthening countries' long-term low emissions development strategies, and how those can support the process of revising NDCs. And of course, the livestock sector and all of related sectors need to feature prominently and in a strengthened way in these documents. So we are very glad to have you join us. We will be hearing the experience from some of our experts from a country level in terms of how the Tier 2 inventories have contributed to improved target setting when it comes to NDC. So without any further ado, I am going to hand over to my colleague Lawrence from the UNFCCC to give us some opening remarks. Thank you. Lawrence, yes, there you are. Please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. I'm sure I'm audible enough. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Josh, for this. My name is Lawrence Mashungu. I am the regional coordinator for NDCs, LTLEDs here in Uganda at the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change Regional Collaboration Centre for Eastern and Southern Africa. Yeah, coming from the UNFCCC, we are glad to have this collaboration with AfCAP, and this collaboration does not start here as such. We've done a lot of other engagements that we've done with AfCAP. Notably also enough is the engagement that we had last year when we had a training on LTLEDs, which coincided with the Africa Climate Week. And we are glad to also point out that AfCAP was a lead institution in that, which also brought in other organizations, UNDP and others, and we ended up having sort of 9 partners to that. So we really appreciate AfCAP for this continued collaboration. Now coming to this webinar as such, we understand one thing that is very critical is that 2025 we are coming in to the next round of NDCs under a decision of the COP, which calls on countries to submit a new and updated NDC each and every 5 years, now cemented also by a decision on common timeframes, which means each year ending with a 0 and also ending with a 5, we have a new NDC, which means 2025, 2030, 2035, we'll be having each cycle of the NDC. And every cycle of the NDC for 2025, for example, the time frame it has to go to 2030, 2035, yes, that is a 10-year time frame. So maybe one thing that might be very, very critical also doing this work is that the experience that we have seen in the implementation of the past NDC, we have seen that the NDCs, especially for livestock, which is so much important in Africa as such, has not been integrated into the NDCs. Why? Possibly mainly because of the issue of data and the issue of the type of reporting that we have. So of course, when you are reporting at tier 1, we may not have other options for mitigation because those options need a lot of information for them to be implementable and also to be reported, something of that sort. So we are very much glad that AfCAP has worked with the countries to ensure that they go deeper into sectors so that the sectors are able to be elaborated more so that when we update the NDCs are implementable and they are also reportable, something that is very important. So I don't want to spend much time on this. I want to appreciate the government of Zimbabwe and obviously the government of Kenya, who are also going to give us some reflections of what they are doing. I'm quite confident that this region, we're doing quite well, especially with this work. And of course, I will continue also to give credit again to AfCAP for making sure that we go deeper into sectors so that we flesh out those issues that we need to ensure that our NDCs are implementable and they are reportable and they make a lot of sense both to the farmer and also to our economy. So in opening this meeting, I would want to encourage each and every one of us to actively participate, give out their views, because each and every one of us idea is very important as we want to ensure that the next round of NDCs are done well and climate commitments that we are proud of as countries. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lawrence, for those remarks and for contextualizing it nicely for us. As I say, we are always very privileged to work very closely with you in furthering this work. And a warm welcome again to those who have been joining while we were speaking. We're right at the beginning. We were just doing the opening remarks. And I am now going to go straight into handing over to one of our key colleagues and experts for AfCAP, who's also based at the University of Zimbabwe, Dr. Walter Svinurai, to give us an overview of the livestock tier 2 GHG inventory development. Please go ahead, Walter. We can see your slides, but maybe just maximize them. There we go. Right. Not yet.
Okay, thanks, Josh. And also thanks to Lawrence. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. I'm happy to talk to you through this webinar about the overview of how do we develop our livestock tier 2 GHG inventories. I just thought before I go into this topic, it's always important to motivate why the debate around livestock is increasing in Africa. And I want to thank Lawrence. He has already shed some light into the developments that are occurring in terms of NDCs. So I'll just say a little bit of that. and then I will continue to then talk about how do we go about the livestock GHG inventory. And this is not going to be a highly technical, presentation where we need to look into the equations, but at least just to guide those who are hearing it for the first time, is to say, what should they do? What are sort of entry points in migrating to a tier 2 GHG inventory? And what are some of the things to expect in a nutshell? So I think it is quite important that we always reflect on what we expect from Africa when you look across the globe. And you can actually see that our population is expected to reach around 80 million by the time of 2050. So we are a growing population in Africa, and surely because of that growth, also mainly linked to rural livelihoods, I mean to urbanization, and you can actually see that on the right here. In the future, we are most likely going to have a lot of demand in terms of meat production and consumption in low-income countries, which are actually the majority of our countries here in Africa. And also interesting to notice that our grazing lands, they occupy about 20% of the global lands, but at the same, and also have the second largest livestock population, but we are producing very little in terms of global production. So this is quite something that we need to think about, because it's quite linked now to the issue of livestock in terms of climate change agreements, because despite the low productivity, you see that the continued demand in livestock products is going to drive livestock production. So our greenhouse gas emissions are going to, increase. And with the enhanced transparency framework under the climate change Paris Agreement, we see that we now have more reporting obligations with the incoming of the biennial transparency reports, which are coming every 2 years to track our NDCs. And this is really important in the livestock sector, because we see that 33% of greenhouse gas emissions are actually from agriculture, if you're looking at from an African perspective. And if you dissect that, you can actually see that we don't see a lot of cropland emissions coming there from the Forester database, which also reflect the importance of livestock as it were. And another important aspect, which is quite linked to this low productivity that we have here in sub-Saharan Africa, we can actually see that we produce a lot of gases for every product that we get from our livestock, be it milk or meat. This one is just showing us for meat. Sub-Saharan Africa, just as other developing countries, we are almost double the greenhouse gas emission intensity in the developed world. And this just reflects also on the productivity gaps that we've already mentioned. But we also need to look at this as an opportunity, because if we're going to increase the production from livestock, then we'll also get a benefit of reducing those emissions. And so this is what Lawrence was talking about, to say, so why should we really talk about this tier 2 as it were? And so if we reflect on this analysis that was done by the CGIAR colleagues, we can see that despite the importance that we've justified to say livestock are important in our economies, but we still see that very few countries have committed themselves to implement some actions on livestock in Africa. Just about 6 of them talking about mitigation, and just about 21 of them talking about adaptation. Remember, we have about 54 countries in Africa. And the whole issue here is really a limitation in terms of data to adequately illustrate our ambitions in these NDCs. And so it has been a challenge. We expect perhaps with this NDC revision that this map will actually change in terms of what it's reflecting. And so if we look at the global scale, we actually talk of 2 extinct type of livestock sectors, those that are in the developed world, which have quite clear measures which links their livestock development policies and these climate change policies. But in our case, the majority was still not clear with the links in terms of our livestock policies and what we want to do in these NDCs. So the issues of tier 2 GHG inventories, they now become important. And in as much as we develop these inventories, they are going to help us, to identify priority areas for reducing those emissions. And of course, we should be able then with these tier 2 inventories to actually try to bring closer the NDCs and the development policies. And what we need to realize really is improved productivity. And of course, as mentioned earlier, we can come to the issue of reducing emission intensity. So I'm just going to highlight how would it take for us, for any country, or what it took us to develop our tier 2 GHG inventory in about 6 steps, but these steps can be, further unpegged to maybe up to 20 or 30 steps altogether. But the first thing is, if you want to migrate to a tier 2 GHG inventory, we need to analyze at national level, livestock really a key contributor to emissions, and we do a key category analysis. And once we are convinced that it's really an important sector in our economy, then we should proceed to set up some institutional arrangements to say, no, guys, we need to move on from tier 1 to tier 2. So you can actually get this knowledge based on your tier 1 GHG inventory, and then you need to actually set up institutions that will be responsible for compiling or developing a tier 2 GHG inventory. And once that is there, then you can always go out and collect data and analyze the data and, use all means available to try to address some data gaps. As you know, tier 2 is quite data demanding, and so there's got quite a data issues. I will illustrate each of these steps in the coming steps. And of course, once we address data gaps, we should be able now to compile the GHG inventory. And for transparency's sake, we need to document all the data sources that we use in it. And of course, perform an uncertainty assessment to see where are the most errors, or what I would say, inaccuracies in terms of emissions, where are they coming from? And we need this information so that we improve our actions when we compile the next NDCs. So this is a key category analysis for us here in Zimbabwe. And for this key category analysis, you can always choose to include forestry or not to include it, depending on accuracy, because forestry emissions are always difficult. But we can actually see that from our end, if we include forestry, agriculture, livestock through endemic fermentation, they are quite a key sector. And imagine if we were to improve, to remove all these other forestry sectors, still livestock was going to dominate, because these other energy sectors that are not shown here, they'll still be, lower than endemic fermentation. And if we just look into the agriculture and forestry sector on its own, excluding those other sectors, you can actually see that our livestock through endemic fermentation, they contribute up to 10%. And again, this analysis still includes the forestry. And if we're to remove that, then we're going to see even more contributions from endemic fermentation. So it's quite important that we understand the issue of including forestry or not including forestry, because the statistics that you always get, it depends on that. And because we made this observation that endemic fermentation is continuing to show up in all our national communications, then it was quite important to really zoom in and look into the livestock sector itself to say which species are really the key. So we can actually see that much of our emissions are coming from the agro-pastoral system, which is the beef and other dead cattle in the smallholder systems. As beef cattle, they contribute 90% of our cattle head. This situation is almost, similar across most African countries, I presume. But also we've got a good portion from the dairy. And so the IPCC guidelines always tell us that when you see those animal species with huge populations, then we really need to develop tier 2 and interrogate the emissions and get more accuracy. And so that's the first decision of a key category analysis. And then we went on to build the institutions that are responsible for compiling the livestock tier 2 GHG inventory. So all along, this work has been done under the Ministry of Environment. I presume is still the situation in many countries. But now it has to be, downstreamed to the Ministry of Agriculture, and we have our Division of Livestock Research. And so these ones are the ones that took the lead to now develop the tier 2 GHG inventory. But within them, they have to coordinate two broad groups. One for the technical team that is responsible for compiling the inventory, which also has got a mix of expertise from international experts to local experts, as well as our officers from the Climate Change Management Department and the coordinating institution. And we also have an advisory group made up of about 15 institutions that are looking into giving an oversight into this whole compilation. So they will be consulted to provide data. They can also review the document as it were. And so it is quite important to have such a setup because you want coordination to be smooth. And, the issues of data availability is always a challenge. But if you have this advisory committee, you can always reach out to them and, coordination becomes a bit easier. So this is the second step according to my initial slides. And then we need to then move into the issue of data. So the tier 2, by virtue of being called tier 2, it means there's always the tier 1, which is the simplest method that most countries rely on as long as they don't have more disaggregated data. And, it just looks at all animals being equal, whether it's a calf or it's a bull. We assume that in terms of methane production, they produce the same. So in that regard, we just need to know the total number of cattle that we have in the country and just use a fixed emission factor to calculate our emissions. But now the tier 2 approach is more to reality in the sense that it says all animals are not equal. The cows are always smaller than the bulls, and the bulls are always larger than, the 2-year-old, steers, as it were. So we need really to look at that. And also breeds, they are quite diverse. Some breeds are small, like our indigenous breeds, but exotic breeds are bigger. And so once we capture those animal variations, I think we're closer to reality in terms of representing what we have. So the tier 2, I would say mainly it's anchored on two main parameters: the livestock weight, which separates the different animal categories, and of course the feed, which they eat. But of course there are also other, variables that you need to look at, and here I've just summarized. So it will be quite important for us to split our herd of cattle in terms of production system. For example, in dairy, we always have intensive and the smallholder, or the semi-intensive. And within those production systems, we really need to split our herd into those respective groups. I've already mentioned about that. And then these are some of the parameters in addition to the live weight that I mentioned about, but we need to know exactly what the animal is, eating in its within those particular subcategories. And of course, we need to know how manure is handled within each subcategory. And I've already mentioned that the process looks similar from a presentation point of view, but when you go into it, it's quite a rigorous process. And so you always have hurdles in terms of finding data for this. So it's quite important to use various means of addressing those data gaps. This could be research publications, any information from industry associations, or official data from our government. And, I think you have some time to look at this guidance. It's quite important. We used it in trying to address some of those, data gaps. I'm just looking at my time. Please allow me to rush to the second part. So I'll just highlight, we completed our tier 2 GHG inventory last year. with the support of unique land use and forestry experts and financial support from the New Zealand government. And so this is just a screenshot of our report. It's now published, and if anyone needs it, I can always share with them. So here I'm just going to share in terms of the main challenges that we faced, and some data issues. At least it could be an eye opener for those that wants to migrate into that. I'll try also to rush. Because Bernard will also want to talk. So yeah, like I've already mentioned, the livestock are a key category in our national emissions. Every time we report our emissions. And when we did our NDCs, we are one of those countries that could not put mitigation because we didn't have reliable data. But then this also led to us to increase in terms of our attention, in terms of prioritizing, improving the livestock GHG improvement. And the aim is really to say, let's have this in the next NDCs in 2025. And we have started, engaging stakeholders in the livestock sector, because moving from the tier 2 itself to go into the NDC, there is quite a big space there in terms of stakeholder engagement. Because in the NDCs, we're not just ambitious, but we need to bring the stakeholders on board and bring in actions that are on the ground. So we're at that phase where engaging stakeholders in the livestock sector and, to have their buy-in. So this is just in a summary of the output that we got. You can see now that we are broken down further into the cattle sector, and we can actually see that the agro-pastoral system, which is our smallholder farmers who hold 90% of the national herd, they are the ones that are producing the majority of emissions. And of course, our ranging system, which is more like commercial beef systems. Otherwise, here in Zimbabwe, our dairy sector, combined small and intensive, is just 1% of national emissions. But one observation that is coming is that because if you rely on IPCC emission factors or just data from IPCC when you're calculating your emissions, not only in Zimbabwe, but maybe across the region, what we see now is that the tier 2 method is generating relatively, larger emission factors. And so our emissions with the tier 2 approach are almost doubling. We have seen this in Malawi, we've seen this here in Zimbabwe, and even across the region of Southern Africa. And we've seen this in many reports. So what this simply means is that the live weights that are being used by the IPCC are not really typical live weights of the animals that we have. And so you can actually see that for every IPCC default emission factor, most countries, they will actually give you relatively higher. So whether the emission factor is high or low, it just depends on the live weight of the animal in your country. And this means it's quite important to get live weights as accurate as possible, within our countries. So in order for us to disaggregate this data, much of our data here is collected at farm type level. So we don't have prescribed production system per se, but our knowledge will actually help us to say large scale farmers are the ones that are in the intensive, and the small scale farmers in what we call A2 here, they are the semi-intensive dairy, which others in other countries would call it smallholder dairy, perhaps, but we don't want to name those definitions. But the other thing that we also struggle with is to really put those animals in the head structures. So we know we've got adult cows, we've got adult males. All this data is collected by our Zimbabwe Statistical Agency in that format. But they will just tell you that heifers, they are 1 to 3 years old. But surely, scientifically, that information is not enough, because a 1-year-old heifer is different from a 2-year-old heifer, is different from a 3-year-old heifer in terms of methane production. So again, there's something to look at, but at least we can characterize the breeds that you can find across those production systems. So this slide is just trying to see how we migrated from the way in which the data was collected and trying to meet the tier 2 GHG inventory, requirements. And then for each of those animal categories, we also need to know their populations. And this slide is just illustrating that in Zimbabwe, we don't have a continuous population data set from 1990 to 2021. And thus we had to use interpolation and extrapolation for those periods that are shown there. And again, this will be a challenge not only in Zimbabwe, but you might also find it in many other countries. And then the data for live weight, which I already mentioned, that is quite important to have when you're compiling your tier 2 GHG inventory, as accurate as possible, because this is the main driver of that data. So you can actually see here that we have literature values for some age groups, and for some we don't have. That's number one. And where we are not happy with the live weights that we got from literature, then we also bring in experts to contribute to deciding on those values. But one more observation is that many of these literature values that we get, they might not even distinguish between male and female. And that becomes a problem now for the GHG inventory. So I think the challenge that we are picking here is that the manner in which we get data from literature is not really suiting directly into what the tier 2 GHG inventory requires. And this situation is just the same as with our dairy cattle. And I said also we need to know the diet composition of the animals, because digestible energy is the one that drives methane production. And again, this data is only available in terms of chemical composition of the feedstuffs, but as to say ration composition, what is the total package that the animal eats, what we normally call the feed basket, this we don't have at the moment. And so we ended up using expert opinion and trying to, come up with that. So as well as the IPCC method links endemic fermentation or emissions from the animal with manure management emissions. Again, you would want to know what sort of systems are being used to store manure for each of those animals in their subcategories. And again, this information is still not available in our case, and I understand it's still a problem in most countries. So I'm not going to read through these needs because I want to give the next speaker the opportunity, but it's just a summary of all the things that I mentioned. And of course, the data issues, they also relate to all the slides that I shared. I'm sure Jamie will share this PowerPoint with you. You can as well go into detail to look at what we are trying to do here in Zimbabwe in improving our tier 2. But the last part is that, so these are the sort of investments that we have received so far. So the New Zealand Agricultural Greenhouse Gas Research Centre has supported our work to start off this work, and it's running for 2 years, up to 2025, and the total investment is around 255. I can see NDC here. You correct me if that figure is not right. But since then, we also managed to get some funding from our own local CBIT project to try to support some workshops that we're doing in the tier 1 inventory. Then I can see my colleagues from FAO, they are here. They've also brought an investment of about 130,000. Now, this is all about bringing the stakeholders to say, let's discuss these issues in detail. Can you identify some priorities? And this is a preparatory, for the NDC revision. My last slide also speaks to other investment that we recently got through our country requisition from the Ministry of Environment, which is about $500,000, and CCAC is now coming in, trying to support, further collection of accurate data, to really feed into this tier 2, and more importantly, to do the mitigation assessment. This work is quite complementary with what we're doing within New Zealand. So we are just hopeful that we'll be able to to have our livestock in the next NDCs, and of course some proposals that are underway. Otherwise, this is it for my end. My apologies. I think I've spent quite a lot of time. Back to you, Josh.
Thank you very much, Walter. No problem at all. I think we'll be able to catch up with time. I see a couple of people have asked the question around the slides being shared. Definitely, just want to confirm that we will be sharing these presentations, of course, with the permission of the presenters. And to those who are joining, who have been joining in between, a warm welcome to you. We've heard the first presentation of the Zimbabwe experience, and we are going to be moving on to the Kenyan experience. And before I hand over to Bernard, and thank you, Walter, you already started calling them out, but a lot of key collaborators we have that I've noticed are in the room. I noticed the folks from FAO. I think I saw Saskia and I saw Emable from FAO. Warm welcome to you, as well as Andy Wilkes, who you mentioned as well, from the New Zealand Agricultural Greenhouse Gas Research Centre. Warm welcome to you. And of course, to Prof. Sibanda from FANAPAN. I think I also noticed you were here. So we will have a question and answer session at the end. And for comments and for any of our collaborators, I think any comments from you in terms of the contribution you've made to this work, or any interest that you have in the presentations, would be more than welcome. But without further ado, warm welcome to Bernard, one of our key members and one of our collaborators and experts within AfCAP, but also functioning as the Climate Change and Livestock Sustainability Head in the State Department for Livestock Development in the Republic of Kenya. Karibu, Bernard, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Josh. Thanks very much, Walter, for setting the scene. I think what you've said is more or less on what we are going through as a country, and the experiences are more or less the same. So as Josh has said, my name is Bernard Kimoro. I also work with the AfCAP in supporting especially the areas around policy. So today I'll just talk about, give the practical side of what Walter has talked about. Walter has talked about the technical side. So after we have all this data, we have done the inventories, then what next? That will be the next question. So next, please. I think the introduction, more or less what Walter has already said. If you look at the globally, the livestock sector, or in Kenya we call it a subsector, over 30%, a third of the world is used by livestock. In Kenya, when you look at it, last national census, over 80% of the population is actually practicing one form of livestock or the other. Walter has also alluded to the size of the livestock herd. Africa is the second highest. And if you look at globally, we really have a big livestock population. So what I've tried to put on that table is to depict the issues around the Horn of Africa. If you look at the population, 50% of all our livestock actually in Africa are within the Horn of Africa. And globally, 9% of the world's cattle population is actually from that region. So the Horn of Africa is quite a big livestock herd, followed by the other regions, West Africa, Central Africa. We normally, the Northern African region, sometimes we have not been capturing. We capture mainly on the Sub-Saharan Africa. Next, please. If you look at the issues around livestock and climate change, there's a dilemma, there's a paradox. Whereas the sector is very critical to especially low to medium income countries. On issues around climate change, there's a paradox about is livestock a victim? Is it a villain? Yeah? A victim in that it is affected by the burden of climate change, but also the fact that the emissions, it also is vilified with emissions. So supply chains, we see that FAO quotes between 12 and 14.5% in terms of methane emissions. In Kenya, we see that GEBA in 2013 quoted about 25%. We have just finished our national inventory. which you're going to use in the BTR, and we realized that it is now contributing 36% of the national greenhouse gas emissions. So all the categories, especially cattle, dairy, non-dairy, sheep, goats, and camels, they really contribute quite substantially. And of course, 80% of that is coming from ruminants. And if you look at the profile of those emissions, over 90% are from enteric fermentation in form of methane. And that is the case for Kenya and the rest of Africa. Next. Of course, the fact that livestock has been in that paradox also brings a bit of challenges to the sector. One is the fact that some of the people are seeing livestock as a problem. There has been an issue that in terms of climate finance, we really see very little investment in the livestock sectors across especially African regions. That is not just for livestock. If you look at the agri-food systems in general, globally, the amounts quoted, for only 4.53% of total climate finance actually goes to agri-food systems. And of that, only less than 1% goes to smallholders in terms of climate finance, and even less to livestock sector specifically. One of the biggest challenges to that is, of course, the issue of what Walter said. We don't have robust data and evidence that is actually indicating that if we invest in reducing emissions, we can actually be able to balance the issues around environmental integrity and sustainable development. So that is one of the challenges that we still have. Next. Yeah, so in this slide, what I've tried to depict is the reason why this low finance support. Of course, if we have less in terms of evidence, it also means that we have not integrated our livestock sectors into especially adaptation mitigation actions, into national targets, into our national plans, strategies, and policies. So without evidence, we have not integrated national plans, and that is a problem across. Of course, even if we have those targets or even evidence, we have not been able to clearly give those actions that are required, especially in our NDCs, whether it is the national adaptation plans or even national climate plans. We have not been able to give clear and well-defined actions that can actually bring in issues around mitigation and adaptation. And if you look across, only about 36% of our countries have included something to do with the mitigation actions. I think Walter already mentioned that. And only about 55% of African countries have included anything to do with adaptation actions in some of these documents, especially the NDCs. Next, please. So in Kenya, then after realizing the issue, then we identified a number of areas that we thought are critical for us to be able to integrate livestock into national plans, into climate change strategies. One of them is that if you are to have effective climate actions, then you need to have good coordination mechanisms where livestock is actually integrated in national climate actions or even national plans or even strategies. So effective coordination is critical, and that has to start from the sector itself. Is it well coordinated for it to be able to lobby and advocate for inclusion in the national plans and the strategies? And then the other issue that we also identified is the fact that there still exists what we call systemic barriers. Issues around low awareness in the other ministries, the other stakeholders, in terms of the opportunities to be able to reduce emissions using very, very low cost interventions, in different livestock systems. Of course, We still have a challenge in terms of inadequate capacity for data collection, and all the way the continuum in terms of doing emissions tracking, and lack of technical expertise. So those are systemic challenges that need to be overcome. And we thought that is one area that we wanted to work on. And then after that, we thought it is important for us to be able to have wide understanding and awareness. And here we realize that not only people outside the sector, even within the sector, there has been very low understanding, even within our Ministry of Agriculture and our department. There has been low understanding in terms of what are the alternative options of reducing emissions or even creating adaptation. And therefore, that's an area that we thought would be important for us to work on. And then, of course, institutional strengthening. Yes, you need to, for you to be able to advocate, you need to have champions within the sector, and without proper and strong institution and individuals within the institutions, you cannot be able to advocate issues around livestock and put them in the national plans and strategies. Next. So if you look at Kenya's livestock sector, I can confidently say we are properly integrated in the different strategies at national, at sectoral, and even at subnational level. At the very highest level, our constitution talks about everyone being responsible for environmental integrity. But more importantly, if you look at the national plan as advocated in Vision 2030, it is very clear the role of livestock as in one of the pillars, the economic pillar specifically. We also have the agriculture sector transformation and growth strategy, and more specifically, we have the Kenya Climate Smart Agriculture strategy and its implementation framework. So in that, especially the ones that deal with the climate smart agriculture strategy and implementation framework, livestock comes out very clearly in terms of its role in the triple wins that are envisaged: increasing productivity, issues around adaptation, and reducing emissions. And specifically on reducing emissions, livestock has been given the biggest role. And we have put all this into the NDC, beginning with the first NDC, the INDC of 2016, and the one we updated in December 2020. And of course, we also have the National Adaptation Plan, where livestock is also properly integrated. So all the actions which are in the Kenya Climate Smart Agriculture Strategy and the implementation framework have been transitioned into the NDC. And those are the ones that will give the targets, as we shall see next. Yeah, next. But despite all that, we still have continuing challenges. Institutional capacity, there is always transitions. People who are trained will always move out, so we still have those challenges, but we're working on how to be able to mitigate the same. Of course, the issue of data gaps and lack of database has been mentioned by Walter. There could be data, but it's not published, for example. But there is also instances where it is available, but it's scattered, it's everywhere. So the sources are not known. There is also instances where we don't even have data at all. So those are the challenges around data and the database. And of course, the other issues around is beyond the support we are receiving from partners. How do we sustain the inventory plan within the livestock sector? So that is an ongoing challenge. Next. For us, then in terms of institutional arrangements, what we have done is, of course, we have the Climate Change Directorate, the CCD there, which is the lead agency. So in all activities that we do, they're usually involved in terms of the inventory process. So they are the ones who lead the process. Within the section where I head, that is where all issues around climate actions are domiciled. And with inventories, we coordinate through a unit, as we shall see next, which is called the Greenhouse Gas and MRV Management Unit, which is the one that coordinates the core group. But all those are then guided by the standard operating procedures as indicated. Next. So that is what we are saying in terms of the structure. So we have the State Department. Below that, of course, we have a directorate. Then below the directorate, we have climate change and livestock sustainability section, which has 3 units. The critical one is the GMMU, the greenhouse gas and MRV management unit, which works with the core team that does the emissions inventory within the sector. The others are about adaptation, and there's also a unit that we have recently set up to deal with the assessments and performance modeling to support the climate actions. Next. For us, again, we follow the same process as what Walter indicated, so I won't go very deeply into it. Of course, we are the experts who are trained on GHG inventory process. We have 2 members of staff, one recently left service, but we still have one who is still there, who are trained both in New Zealand and South Africa. We have also done training of our personnel on Tier 2 methods, where FAO, Climate and Clean Air Coalition, FAO, through a grant of CSC, and GRA also supported the process. Of course, the technical support for formation of core group for livestock inventory, this was done through the support of the New Zealand government through GRA. Data collection, we have also gotten support from FAO, same grants like Zimbabwe, and also GRA to support the core group. Of course, the inventory structure, especially for dairy, we had already done, as we shall see, but specifically for Tier 2, for non-dairy ruminants, we got quite a bit of support from GRA in terms of the inventory structure, and of course, the inventory and publication for Tier 2 reports mainly from GRA. Next. As part of the inventory group, I think Walter also mentioned, we under the coordination of the GHG and MRV management unit, we have the core group, and you can see the composition. What is critical here? Let's look at the affiliations. So we have people from government and government agencies. We have people from research, academia. We also have people from the industry. I think the table was too long to show everyone. We also have people from the industry, where we have people from producer organizations. We also have institutions that are also supporting specific aspects of the industry, like the feed manufacturers. Of course, number 3 is very critical for us. Kenya National Bureau of Statistics provides the official data. So the others are like the advisory group that Walter talked about. So they also provide the data, which we can then look at. Next. So this is what we have done so far. 2015, the importance of Tier 2, especially for dairy, was identified because we were doing a dairy NAMA concept note that was be submitted to GCF. But more importantly, so we completed that process in 2016, 2017, where we had a manager, core team, inventory structure, and data collection for Tier 2. We published that in 2020. In 2022, we started now the process of Tier 2. We developed the SOP guidelines. We updated the Tier 2 dairy inventory. And then we also now started the inventory structure for the other key category, livestock meters, where we looked at the non-dairy cattle, sheep, goats, and of course, Tier 1 for camels. We are still trying to get data to transition to Tier 2 for camels. And then in 2024, we have now in the process of publishing for the entire sector, Tier 2 GHG inventory for livestock in Kenya. Next. So what we have learned is always start, whether you have data or little data. It's always important for you to start the process somewhere, identify the key strategic partners, and involve them right from the beginning. The more they understand, the better. And then, of course, it is important for the process to have a dedicated team. So for us, we have a unit which works with the core group. And of course, having an SOP or standard operating procedure clarifies all those roles. The activity plan is very important. When you want to do what, and who is to do what, and that is also identified in the SOP, but the specific timelines may not be very clear there. And then what we have also done is for data. One of the things that can also be done is, can you get data from projects which are existing or programs or initiatives to support the process? Because we have projects that have a lot of data, but sometimes we leave them out. So that information is very great. Use also the research projects which are there, which can give the data that is required. And then institutionalize. If you have a unit, a section, a unit, and the core group, and all that is clear, then you don't have many problems. Next. So one of the things that helped us also to transition to Tier 2 is that we got support from GRA, and luckily, I think Andreas is here. We worked together with him. So we did a scoping study that enabled us to be able to identify how do we approach inclusion of livestock in the NDC. That was just before 2020 when we were doing our updating of the NDC. So we did the scoping of gaps and priorities, and that enabled us to identify the targets. Next. So those are the benefits for advanced Tier 2 methods in livestock. Of course, Walter has already talked about, you have more levers. From a policy perspective, if you talk about reducing absolute emissions, we can only talk about reducing numbers. But with Tier 2, then you have more levers in terms of looking, can you improve on the feeds, the herd structure, can you look at the production system, and those kind of things. Yeah, so it also helps in terms of improving your target in the NDC. So more evidence, more targeting. For example, we used our dairy inventory in updating the NDC and also the second national communication. Of course, you become more sharper. Zimbabwe has indicated that the emissions tend to be slightly higher, so it is more realistic than when you're using default emission factors. Next. So for us, this is how advancing to Tier 2 has been on benefits. Of course, I talked about the NDC, which we updated the first INDC in 2016. They updated the NDC 2020. So we used the updated information from the inventory to be able to give better targets. Of course, the actions in the NDC now, because they are more clearer, we are also able to give indicative costs in terms of the unconditional support or local sources of funding and the conditional support that we require in terms of bilateral or even multilateral support that can also come in, and also private sector. And of course, that has also helped us to be able to mobilize resources. Next. Yeah, so if you look at the current NDC, there are four targets, are all touching on livestock. The one on mitigation is actually only for livestock. Yeah, but the other three are cutting across livestock and crops. They are very broad, but what you have done, please go to the next slide. What you have done is that we are actually unpacking all this through the National Climate Change Action Plan. We have had 3 of them. The first one, we had the first one in 2010 to 2010 to 2017, 2011 to 2017. Then the second one was 2018, 2022. And then the current one, which is 2023, 2027. So we have unpacked this. Let's go to the next slide, please. So if you look at on the first AfCAP I talked about, we didn't have livestock targets. On the second AfCAP, then there were quite a number of livestock targets. For mitigation, the ones which are highlighted in yellow, it was only going to target the dairy industry, with the rest being mainly on adaptation. For the next one, please go to the next slide. For the current National Climate Change Action Plan, we have more mitigation targets. which are geared towards reducing the emissions. The first one is direct to dairy. The second one is on issues of reducing food waste, which is cutting across all the key category. The third one is targeted to animal health and reduction of emissions as a result of poor animal health. So we are targeting vaccination coverage. The fourth one and the fifth are actually looking at emission reduction, reduction of carbon dioxide. Because if you're talking about deepening the emission reduction, you have to look at both the methane and how you're also going to reduce the emissions that are coming out of carbon dioxide as a result of maybe poor land degradation, poor land and soil health as a result of degradation. So, those two are addressing issues around the pastoral areas and how they can actually be able to become sinks of emissions rather than becoming emitters. Next, please. So this continues. Those are more targets for the current NCAP on adaptation. We can go to the next. Let's see, I've run short of time. So how has this unpacking and the use of the data helped us? Like I said, prior to the first NDC, INDC of 2016, we didn't have any investment that was actually supporting livestock sector in terms of climate action. But as we went on now to the second, to the NDC, the updated NDC, we saw a number of projects coming in. We have two World Bank funded projects, one which have actually ended. KSAP was one of them, which operated in more than half of the country, with quite a bit of support going into livestock climate action. We have a project called De-risking, Inclusion and Value Enhancement, which is operating in 4 countries within the Horn of Africa, also World Bank, with 150 million to Kenya. 40% of that is going to climate finance in terms of index-based livestock for adaptation. But now we see they also want to track the emissions, so we have the data, we can help. IFAD has also supported a project called KELCOP with 42% of the funding being climate finance. There's a GCF funded project called Towards Ending Drought Emergencies, which is operating in a landscape within the arid and semi-arid and the rangeland. So it's covering nine counties. And then currently we also have a design of a regional project where Kenya expects to get about 60 million directly from the GCF. It started as the dairy NAMA. So Kenya, Rwanda, Tanzania, Uganda, in total, they receive about 300 million USD. 60 million come to Kenya. Next, please. And we have received quite a bit of support, like in Zimbabwe, improving our capacity. We have received support from the New Zealand government through GRA and the Ministry of Primary Industries and also FAO. We are now currently working on a roadmap with the support of CCSC and FAO. Hopefully we'll get about 700,000 USD for this activity that is going to support the roadmap plus establishment of a livestock MRV system, which is going to be linked to the national MRV system. And then we have also received quite a bit of support in terms of improving capacity to identify and assess the impact of specific mitigation actions from New Zealand government. Next, please. So this is an example of what you have done, the inventory, some of the documents of what we have done so far in Kenya. Next. Yeah, so we see through that support, there have been a bit of outcomes, positive outcomes, animal productivity, because you're like the KSAP project was talking about technologies, innovations and management practices on climate smart agriculture. If you look at it in terms of productivity, there are reports that 10 to 30% due to improved feeding and water availability. Also incomes reported from projects have also been rising, reduced animal mortalities, especially because of the IBLI or index-based livestock insurance, and also investment in the feeds that is taking place And then, of course, emissions are going down based on one project that they have done an outcome of the assessment of the outcome. Next, please. I think that would be the, yeah. So that is the conclusion. Robust systems are critical. Of course, the MRV systems help to reduce the uncertainties. And then beyond that, we should think about how do we use these targets to be able to mobilize resources for the country to take advantage of the opportunity that exists in the livestock sector. Thank you. I think that is the last slide.
Thank you very much, Bernard, for that. Unfortunately, we have run over time. I was looking at the chat and I didn't see any immediate questions that came up. But we are indeed, really pressing on your indulgence at this point in terms of time. We are already very grateful for the time you've taken to be with us. Just to reiterate to those who joined maybe after I'd said it, that the really good presentations that we've had will be shared as part of the postcom, so no need to worry about that. There are a couple of possible follow-ups that we can have to this, but just to say thank you very much to you, Walt, and to you, Bernard, for giving of your time, and of course to you, Lawrence, for and your team for supporting us being able to stage this. There are a couple of really good follow-ups that we can think of. I mean, I think specifically to you, Andy, you were mentioned a couple of times by the colleagues, and we were just thinking, it would be really good to hear an experience from you in terms of the support that has been given to countries in strengthening in shifting to tier 2 inventories. But I'm thinking that this is definitely one for the next time we put together a webinar. So I would urge everybody who attended to just keep an eye out for an announcement once we've crafted on what kind of follow-up we can have on this. As Lawrence mentioned in the beginning, and I also reiterated, we're in a big period of the revision of NDCs right now. So the nature of support that has been offered to countries is very important. This is an ongoing process. So we would like to keep it topical, specifically in this case within the livestock sector, and work towards that. So there will definitely be a follow-up to this. Thank you once again to all of the partners, to the collaborators, to those we've worked with, to the presenters, and to all of you who took the time to attend. I'm just checking with you, Lawrence, quickly, if you want to have a quick last word, or if you're okay with us closing.
Yeah, you can do the closing, sure.
All right. Thank you so much. And look out for the postcoms. We do have your details from your registration, so we'll be sharing all of this information with you. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.